Hi everyone, I'm Any New Province, and this week we're playing Ratlock for Net Benefits, the series where we explore the benefits of net decking in Pauper. Ratlock has been contending for tier status in Pauper for quite some time, but you hardly ever see it break through. That's why I really have to give it to Racerman, who placed third in the Pauper Challenge on Magic the Gathering Online with Ratlock this week. I'm going to start breaking down the deck by talking about the namesake card, Chittering Rats. Chittering Rats costs 1 black for a 2/2 rat, and when it enters the battlefield, target opponent puts a card from their hand on top of their library. You probably can't fully appreciate the power of Chittering Rats until you're digging for your second land drop as your opponent starts chaining Chittering Rats together, making you put spells from your hand back on top of your library that you'll never have any hope of casting because you can't find your land drops. This deck tries to take that feeling to the next level by constantly recurring Chittering Rats on your draw step. You can achieve that using the infamous Archaeomancer Ghostly Flicker loop. The first half of that loop is Ghostly Flicker. It costs 2 and a blue for an instant that exiles 2 target artifacts, creatures, and or lands you control, then returns those cards to the battlefield under your control. We're hoping that one of the permanents we're bouncing with Ghostly Flicker is Archaeomancer, which costs 2 blue for a 1/2, and when it enters the battlefield, you return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. Once you have Chittering Rats, Ghostly Flicker, and Archaeomancer on board, you can Ghostly Flicker, Archaeomancer, and Chittering Rats on your opponent's draw step to make them keep putting that same card back on top of their library. If you're lucky, they won't have an opportunity to see any fresh cards for the rest of the game. We're going to be playing the long game, trying to find our combo pieces to eventually lock our opponent out, so we have a lot of card draw and card filtering to make sure we can achieve that goal. The first card in our card filtering and advantage package is Seagate Oracle, which costs 2 and a blue for a 1/3 wizard, and when it enters the battlefield, you look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the other on the bottom of your library. Seagate Oracle is a great 2-for-1. It's a 1/3, so it can get in the way of a lot of red deck wins or stompy creatures, and it allows you to dig for more cards than Augur of Bolas would if you can assemble a Ghostly Flicker loop with Archaeomancer and Seagate Oracle instead of Chittering Rats. Another awesome value creature and Ghostly Flicker target is Muldrifter. It costs 4 and a blue for a 2/2 flyer, and when it enters the battlefield, you draw 2 cards. You don't always have to pay 5 mana to draw 2 cards with Muldrifter, making it even better. You can actually cast it for its evoke cost, which means you may cast this spell for 2 and a blue. If you do, it's sacrificed when it enters the battlefield. Our last bit of card filtering is Preordain. It costs 1 blue and it lets you scry 2, then draw a card. While this next spell isn't exactly card draw or card filtering, I feel like it fits here because it generates an insane amount of value if you can cast it on a turn that's much later in the game. This is Reaping the Graves. It's an instant that costs 2 and a black, and it allows you to return target creature from your graveyard to your hand, which is pretty underwhelming, but it has the incredibly broken and bannable Storm ability. Storm means when you cast this spell, copy it for each spell cast before it this turn. You may choose new targets for the copies. That means if we can cantrip off or cast a couple of Ghostly Flickers before we cast Reaping the Graves, we can get back 2, 3, maybe even 4 creatures from our graveyard. The rest of this deck is chock full of interaction, and that interaction package starts with one of the best interactive spells in the entire Pauper format. It's Counterspell. It costs blue, and it counters target spell. The rest of our interaction is for targeting creatures that have already entered the battlefield so that we can make sure our opponent's board is clear once we start locking them out of their draw step. First, we have Echoing Decay, which costs 1 and a black for an instant that gives target creature and all other creatures with the same name as that creature -2/-2 until end of turn. Most of the top tier decks in Pauper run a lot of 4-ofs of creatures. Some of those 4-ofs just happen to be creatures with toughness less than 2. That means it's pretty easy to leverage Echoing Decay into a 2 or 3-for-1. We're also running Doomblade, one of the best catch-all removal spells in the entire format. Doomblade costs 1 and a black, and it destroys target non-black creature at instant speed. It wouldn't be a Dimir deck without a few Chainer's Edicts. Chainer's Edict costs 1 and a black for a sorcery that causes target player to sacrifice a creature. Chainer's Edict is even better than its instant speed cousins in slow decks because we can often pay for its flashback cost, which means you can pay 5 black to cast it from your graveyard, then exile it. Rounding out our spot removal removal, we have some Disfigures. Disfigure costs 1 black and gives target creature -2/-2 until end of turn. Disfigure is kind of a concession to spells like Rancor and Ninja of the Deep Hours. We're going to be taking our time, developing our mana base, and playing our 3-drop Seagate Oracles, so we need to do something about those early high-value plays. Our last bit of interaction is Even Car's Justice. It costs 2 black and deals 2 damage to each creature and each player, which would be sweet on its own, but you can even buy it back, which means if you pay 3 additional generic mana as you cast this spell, you can put it into your hand as it resolves. Our last non-land card is a single copy of Unearth. This is really great as a value play in our deck, and it also helps us reassemble our combo if our opponent interacts with it. Unearth costs 1 black and it returns target creature with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If we have no creatures we want to return, we can also just cycle this for 2 mana, which means you can pay 2, discard it, and draw a new card. Alright, let's have a look at this mana base. First, we have Bazooka Bog, which enters the battlefield tapped and exiles all cards from target player's graveyard when it enters. We've also got 1 copy of Radiant Fountain, which enters the battlefield and gains us 2 life, which is a small price to pay for running a land that only taps for generic mana. We're running a blue and a black cycling land in Lonely Sandbar and Barrenmoor. They're both the same sort of card, but just in 2 different colors. When they're in your hand, you can pay blue or a black to discard them and draw a new card if you don't need any more lands. Of course, we've got some Dimir Aqueducts for recurring our lands with awesome enter the battlefield abilities. Dimir Aqueducts enter the battlefield tapped. When they enter the battlefield, you return a land you control to its owner's hand, and when they become untapped, they add blue and black. Finally, we've got some standard Pauper duels in blue and black. They're Dismal Backwaters. They enter the battlefield tapped. When they enter the battlefield, they gain you a life, and when they're untapped, you can tap them for blue or black. Finally, we have 6 basic islands and 4 basic swamps, just enough untapped mana to hit our turn 1 Preordains and Disfigures. Alright, let's have a look at this sideboard. First, we have some Hydroblasts as more efficient counter or removal spells against red decks. We have 2 Dispels for more efficient counter spells against green decks and their pump spells. We have 2 Shrivels if our opponent is going crazy wide on X1s. We have a complete disregard for exiling a creature that we don't want our opponent getting back. We have 2 Nihil Spell Bombs for exiling other slow decks graveyards. We have some Stormbound Geist if our opponent is on Delvers or Edicts, and we have 3 Duresses for pulling counterspells out of our opponent's hands or just disrupting a burn deck. And there it is, Ratlock by Racerman. Congrats again on your finish in the challenge, Racerman. We're going to take this deck into a league at twitch.tv/AnyNewProvince. We're there every Monday night at 7 p.m. Atlantic time playing competitive PauperDecks. Before I go, I just want to remind you that you can like the video or subscribe to the channel down below. I'd seriously appreciate it. It's a great way to let me know you've enjoyed everything, and it really encourages me to keep making great Pauper content. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this deck tech, and hopefully I'll see you on Monday night.